You have to stop and shift the way that you're thinking to understand that looking at the future longer than 3 months or 90 days or 3 years is so that you can start making better decisions today where you invest your time, your energy, and your money.
Technology is transforming how we think, how we lead, and how we win. From InterVision, this is Status Go, the show helping IT leaders move beyond the status quo, master their craft, and propel their IT vision. Welcome to Status Go. I'm your host, Jeff Tunn. I'm very excited about our episode today because we are welcoming back one of the people that kicked off our 2020 series. We talked with Jared Nichols in January about creating the future. So we're going to talk with Jared again today, being that we're here closing in on the end of the first quarter. We want to talk about where do we go from here? How do we assess the progress that we've made? What adjustments do we need to make? But before we get into that, I do want to spend a minute and just introduce Jared. Jared is the founder and the creator of the Foresight Academy. It's a groundbreaking program that teaches leaders and teams the same skills that innovators, industry disruptors, and change makers have used to guide and shape the future they wanted to see. He loves to describe it as changing the way you think about the future, not predicting the future. The other thing, Jared, that I really want to get into maybe later on is I also noticed on LinkedIn that you're a musician and composer. And I want to know how that might fit in with your work, but we'll get to that later. But welcome back to the show, Jared.
Thanks, Jeff. It's great to be back here with you. I always enjoy our conversations. For sure.
Absolutely. To our audience, you kind of missed the pre-conversation. We've already been chatting for about 15, 20 minutes now, just catching up on things. So all good. Yeah, very good stuff. So Jared, when we had you on the episode in January, you talked to us a lot about how do you look at the future and how do you help leaders apply that? So can you kind of start with a recap of the things that we covered in that first episode?
Yeah, and so I always run the possibility that it may have a different take on something since the last time we talked. But
well, we're always learning, right?
Always learning, or I'm just making it up on the fly. No, the idea is really when it comes to the future, there's two. I like to look at these in two separate categories, and I know it's usually more than that. It's an and both. We could get philosophical about it, but for the sake of simplicity, when it comes to our relationship with the future, some folks fall into one camp, which is, well, the future can't be known, so I'm not even going to really spend that much time thinking about it or trying to plan for it. And then the other side is, well, the future can be known to some degree, but it's the people that have a specialized training, or I need to look to the experts, the analysts, find out what they're saying about the future so that I can actually plan for it. And there's value in that to a certain extent, but in both categories, in both situations, what's happening for the person who is trying to make decisions today about their future is that they're relying on somebody else's idea without taking the time to question it. Now, this isn't an exercise in being oppositional for the sake of being oppositional. This is we're talking about the future, and we make the assumptions that either one, it just can't be known at all, so don't spend your time with it, or two, somebody else has it figured out, so I'll go with what they say, right?
Yeah,
I'll go with what they say, and I'll make all of my decisions around that. And if it doesn't work out, well, it doesn't work out. Which most
then I can blame the weatherman because he was wrong again.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So really, the goal, what we talked about last time was that people need to shift the way that they relate to the future by focusing more on how to think about it, rather than relying on what somebody else has told them to think about it. Predictions about the future are notoriously wrong. You can read a long list of predictions that have been completely off, but people made their decisions and judgments around them. That doesn't mean to ignore it. It just means to take it for what it is, understand that it has a certain agenda, there's biases, there's things that are in there, but then to take the time and say, well, this is what they're saying, but what else might be possible? What questions am I not asking, and that is nobody else asking, that could really change the game, that could reveal an area where there's either a new opportunity that you're anticipating before everybody else, or where there's a real significant disruptor that could come out of this if the future starts to go in that direction that nobody's talking about. So, it's about giving people permission to challenge these long set ideas and predictions about the future.
I love that permission to challenge, because a lot of folks are that way, right? They're waiting for the future to happen to them,
Yeah,
rather than challenging what people are saying about the future.
that's
The
right.
other thing we talked about were your three C's, and we don't need to go into real depth on those, but I think it would help our listeners to get a recap of those three C's as well.
Yeah, you're talking about cool, confident, and courageous.
Yes, yes, with the B thrown in for beard. Yeah,
That's
yeah,
right. I just want to see if you're feeling. Yeah, sure. So the three C's. And so if you haven't heard the first episode, they're not cool, confident, and courageous. Although we may have something here, Jeff, that we can
yeah.
work
I
with.
think
But
so. Yeah, yeah.
right. So so this idea is really around what does it take in order for somebody uh, to create the future. Now I know that's something that people like to talk about a lot, put up on a poster. It's inspiring. Let's create the future, and then nothing really
Mhm.
happens.
Right.
And what I found is that the reason why that doesn't happen is not because people don't want it to happen; it's they don't know that they can actually make it happen. And so in my work, my goal in teaching people how to do this is to make it as accessible as possible. Because let's face it, we talked about this in the first episode, but I'll repeat it here: is that strategic foresight was born out of the intelligence community after
Right.
World War II. It was designed to make sure that, or it was intended to make sure that the U.S. was never behind, technologically speaking, to any other foreign power ever again. After they discovered how far behind technologically they were to the Nazi war machine, they were amazed that they won the war, right? I mean, it was like,
Yeah. Yeah.
wow, if things would have gone a little bit differently, this could have been a completely different future. So the uh, the incentive was there to stay way out ahead of competition, which has driven our military industrial complex. It's driven our foreign policy. It's driven so much more than a lot of people realize. So this way of thinking requires you to understand a few things. It's number one, it's typically been left to intelligence agencies or think tanks or folks that have been trained for this specifically, and it's not very accessible to everyone else. So my goal in this was to make this accessible in a way that people could understand, but most importantly, feel that they could take action. And that's where the idea of the three C's came about. And it was, in order to create the future, you must first be conscious, then you must be creative, or excuse me, curious, and then creative. So conscious, curious, and creative. And the simple breakdown for that is being conscious is really just being aware. You've expanded your awareness about the driving forces, both internally and externally, that are guiding and shaping the future today. The ones that we think about externally are, big data, artificial intelligence, climate change. The things that we talk about as being
Mhm.
the real drivers of change for the future. But the more important drivers that influence our decisions are those that are internal. And these are the stories and the narratives, the beliefs, the ideas that we have that really define uh, the actions that we take today. And most of us aren't aware of those. And this seems very unfuturistic because most people like to talk about the future. They want to talk about technology. Well,
Right.
that's fun, but it has very little application right now. So if we're really thinking about people getting involved in creating the future, they have to first understand why they believe what they believe and where it needs to be challenged. So that's the first part. It goes into a whole lot more, but I'm not going to belabor it in this short amount of time here.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, curious is just asking those questions, like what we talked about, recognizing that there are expert opinions, there are analysts, there are ideas about how the future is going to unfold, and rather than stopping there, you look at that and use it as a foundation to jump from and say, well, what else might be possible, right? Like, what if this is possible? What are the things that they're not looking at?
Yeah.
Where are the opportunities that are not so obvious right now? Now, that's really what being curious is challenging those ideas and looking for implications of trends, issues, drivers that we see today, looking at how they might impact various parts of society that are outside of the realm, if you will, or outside of the industry, say, for example, technology, looking at how a new technology that was maybe intended for one industry, how it might have implications to other industries that it's not even been introduced to yet. The example we used, I think, last time is one that is really easy because everybody recognizes it, but it's Facebook.
Right.
Created in 2003 for Ivy League college kids to, the whole who's hot, who's not,
Yeah. Yeah.
really nothing groundbreaking except it was a digital Facebook. And less than 10 years later, after its inception, it was the number one tool used to overthrow a 30 plus year dictatorship in the Middle East.
Right.
So if you want to see where and how technology or system might create the future or create the context for the future, you have to ask questions that others aren't asking. You have to ask how it might impact various parts of society that are outside of the industry it was created in and the audience it was created for. And then that brings you to creative. And that's really where you start working within the context of possible futures, and you start using that to ask those questions of how do the people I serve fare in this future? How does our organization fare in this future? Where are those opportunities? Where are those disruptions? And not just stopping there so you can make a static plan, but instead using what you've uncovered to tell a story, which is ultimately a vision. And the visions that move people to actions are powerful stories, right? So that's what the creative part of this is that if I can create a story for you of what the future might look like, one that you can see how it connects to where we are today, not just, oh, I pulled this out of some science fiction book and threw it at you, but you see this line of progression that, oh, that is possible. But then I'm able to present this picture to you and make it accessible to you. Well, then you have the opportunity to participate in how that future will unfold. And that's really the value of strategic foresight. If more people are doing this, I honestly believe that the better off our future will be. So those are the three C's.
So I think the last time we left our audience, and I'm going to paraphrase the call to action, I think you encouraged them to think about these three C's and start to think about the future differently, really embracing the fact that you can create the future. So here we are, we're almost 3 months later. Help us take a look back. I know you work with leaders across the country, and I'm sure you teach these concepts, and then sometime in the future, you get back with them, and some of them may be stuck, some of them may be having questions about are they approaching it right. So, what are some of the things that you've run into with people that perhaps our listeners are experiencing as well 3 months into this new mindset?
Yeah. Well, the reality is this, Jeff, is that strategic foresight and thinking long term and going through this process is very foreign to the business community.
Hmm.
Not all businesses. I mean, there are some who have done this and they're dominating the world essentially, right? Like Amazon is a perfect example of this. But the reason I point this out, I recently had this discussion we were looking at because people always would say, well, what are some good business cases that demonstrate this? And the truth is, there's not a lot.
Hmm.
That is the sad truth because this was born in the intelligence communities and, for foreign policy and, uh, for public policy, where you are incentivized to think long term and then start taking action today. Well, in the business world, no matter if you're publicly traded or not, we're still incentivized for 90-day increments.
Right.
So the one thing that I've come to realize, and that I always want people to understand on the front, is that this takes real work. It's not unnecessarily complicated, and there's not unnecessary steps that you have to go through, but it takes real work. And that means that you have to stop and shift the way that you're thinking to understand that looking at the future longer than 3 months or 90 days or 3 years, doing that is so that you can start making better decisions today where you invest your time, your energy, and your money. So I always want to
Hmm.
put that on the front end and not, confuse anybody that, oh yeah, you can just roll this right into what you're doing and
Yeah.
not change behavior the way you think, because that's just not the case. So what I find though is uh, to answer your question where people get stuck, um, maybe a better way to answer that, if it's okay with you, is to say where I've seen people really excel. and
Okay.
it's in
I
one
like that.
part.
Positive rather than negative.
Yeah, you like that? You like that?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's good. That's good.
So, what I was going to say is that the place that I find most people really excel, or where you see some real shifts and changes, is in that first area around being conscious, being aware.
Yeah.
Like students that I've had at UT, and my students, by the way, are graduate and executive education students. So these are people that are either presidents of companies or they're executives in large organizations, and they're being groomed to run the whole place. And so you find some uh, real breakthroughs with these folks because they're asked to challenge their ideas and stories that they have used to make decisions, and how they have related to this idea of disruption in the future, and how they view strategy, and all these things that were neatly packaged and wrapped up for them. Now they're having to unwind that. And so you see that for many of them, it becomes very freeing, right? It's not this, hey, guess what? You were wrong, and this is how you should think. It's no, look, when you free yourself from these narratives and these ideas, it's not to free you up from one and captivate you into another. Is to free you up from one and then free you up from all of them, realizing you will never have all the answers. You'll never have it all figured out. And that is a serious, serious advantage. So I see people accelerate when they start to free themselves from these old ideas that are limiting their ability to take risk, to challenge status quo,
Hmm.
to try something different that might really change the game. And then all of a sudden, disruption and change becomes a welcomed, and I'll use that lightly. Nobody likes to be disrupted, but you look at it through opportunity, right? You look at it in real opportunity, like, oh man, everybody else is hunkering down. Now's the time to jump out of the trench and go, go scavenge, go find these opportunities that are out there. So that I would say, if anybody does anything, it's really start challenging your old ideas and beliefs about why you believe certain things, why you make certain types of decisions. But once you get past that and you start to get into really creating the future or identifying opportunities, another place that people really excel is through this process we call scanning. Now, this is it okay to get into some technical stuff here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, so scanning is one I found consistently with the people I work with. I used to think, man, they'll just breeze through this. This is a no brainer. But then I remember when I was first learning this was one of the most exciting parts, and that is where you start formulating critical questions, or questions of inquiry, as I like to put it, really broad based questions like how might artificial intelligence impact the future of higher education, right? Just take a couple of random things, put them
Yeah.
there, and then you start to research and you start to go in, and the scanning takes you down this rabbit hole that leads to more questions and more questions, and you start to see new connections to other things that you had never even thought about before. And one consistent thing I've seen over and over again with folks is that when they start scanning around a certain driver of change and how it might impact their industry, the first thing they discover is how little they knew about what was going on in their industry. And
That's
they'll be the
probably
ones to
true.
tell you this. And it's
Yeah.
like, because we go heads down, right?
Yeah.
Heads down, I'm just going to get done what I need to get done today. And they start to scan. They go, whoa, I had no idea that people were even talking about this. And here it is, right in front of my face. But the scanning allows them uh, to connect dots. And this is the exciting part. They're asking a question, they go looking for the answer to that question. It creates more questions, which ultimately makes them more curious. And it is expanding their thinking and awareness of what is actually happening in the world around them. I mean, if at the base level, disruption happens because you had your face in the sand,
Right.
right?
Right.
But if you don't have your face in the sand anymore and you're looking around and you can see things and start to think about them differently, well, that gives you a massive advantage. If you just stopped there, you're better off than most people that are out there today. You don't even have to get into scenario building and all that other kind of stuff. If you just stopped and you learned how to scan and do it right, and then set up indicators that certain types of futures might be unfolding. I mean, there's all kinds of simple tools you can build right in Google to do this. You have got a much greater advantage when it comes to making informed decisions for the future than most people do.
Is it as simple as looking at your LinkedIn feed or your Twitter feed and chasing the links that, hey, I'm reading this article and it links to this other article or refers to this article. So I'm going to go read that one. Then I'm going to go read the next one.
Nope.
And they're all related to my industry. Is that kind of how
Nope.
you get started doing
Nope.
that?
Nope. No. That's the
Nope.
worst
Nope.
thing you can
Okay.
do. Definitely the worst.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, like because all of those are built. As a content creator, I can tell you if I link something in an article I've written, it's going to be linked back to another article I've written, so I can suck you into my vortex. And keep you locked in. So don't do that. I mean,
Okay. So how do I do it? How do I
yeah.
start?
So the first place to start is and I'm just thinking about this now, Jeff. I will send this to you, and you can post this in the show notes if you want. But I have a 5-step process for scanning. We use this in the Foresight Academy.
Oh,
But the
cool.
first thing, really, and I'm gonna just summarize here for the sake of because I don't know what my 5 steps are. No. I'm going to summarize here for the sake of this. But the first thing is to really identify a trend or an issue, like we've talked about before, or a driver that you're really interested in, a concern you might have, and you just formulate a question out of that. So the first thing is to really ask a question.
Mhm.
How might artificial intelligence impact the future of, I'll just say, higher education, right?
Yeah.
Higher
Yeah.
education.
Yeah.
I'll enter that into Google, and I will set certain parameters in Google. Like, you can go in for the search tools, and I'll set it to either 6 months or, don't look any further back than 6 or 12
Yeah.
months. This is
Yeah. Yeah.
typically my rule for that
Yeah.
because things change so quickly. 12 months at the most, unless it's an academic research paper that has some longevity, but most times 6 to 12 months. Enter that into that. You can even filter that down to certain types of articles and papers and whatnot. The next thing is to see what comes up in that feed, and you start looking. And the first thing you have to, you'll immediately start finding articles that are addressing that issue.
Yep.
Open up one of those, and you have to understand credibility. Like, is the publication you're looking at credible? There's a lot of them out there that are just junk, and they're pretty easy to spot as junk. But you'll find some that are credible, and that doesn't take you long to really figure that part out. And just start reading about what they're saying, right? So somebody is answering that question. This goes
Right.
back to what are the experts saying? What are the analysts saying? That's why I say don't discredit it. You're going to need it, so that you know where to go next. So
Yep.
they're going to be saying a certain thing in this article that, yes, it's going to be biased. Yes, it's going to have an agenda. Who cares? That's part of being human. What you're looking for is other signs or clues about what's being said right now. What you will almost always find is that when you ask a question like, how might artificial intelligence impact the future of higher education, they're going to answer more questions in there that you didn't even ask. They're going to create more questions for you, right? So
Mhm.
you may start looking at maybe a very specific part of higher education that could be impacted. So if you work in higher education, and again, we're just using this as an example,
Right.
you can look at a very specific part of higher education. Maybe it's in vocational studies. Maybe it's in graduate and executive education. Maybe it's in the arts. You just can start getting much more specific, and you will find that there's clues and things that started with the big overarching question of AI that really present a picture of how automation or artificial intelligence could completely change one part of this industry that nobody is talking about uh, because it's not right in front of our faces yet. So that's and this is
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
vague. Like if we were sitting down and we were doing this on a screen, we would just do this right here.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but so that's really where you start. You just start by asking a big question, and then you start narrowing that question down. And it does feel like a rabbit hole, but
But it's
you know,
intentional. It's an
it's
intentional
very
rabbit hole.
intentional.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're going where you want to go, not where, say, for me as a content creator, wants you to go.
Right.
So
Right. Right.
you're taking control of the direction.
So what I've learned today is I've been doing it all wrong. No, I'm kidding.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
But
No, but
this is a great piece of advice for our listeners to start with, especially if they heard the first episode and they got started and maybe they need some direction of where to go from here. I love that about starting with a question and really just drilling down into it based on Google search and refine the question, make it more specific, and you start to learn more. One final question, and then we probably have to wrap up here, is do you find that you also look across industries to find some of these ideas or some of the context? So the example you were using was AI's impact on higher ed.
Yeah.
Maybe you look at AI's impact on agriculture, just making it up, and you find a connection that helps you solve a problem you may be facing in higher ed. Do you find that
Yeah.
happens?
Absolutely. The industry, you know, the uh, that it really becomes irrelevant because real disruption opportunity is going to be outside of the industry.
Right.
If everybody's talking about it inside of the industry, plain and simple, then everybody's paying attention to it, right? So I'm glad you brought that up. That's a great example. I mean, you're going to find, and actually, what I'm doing right now, Jeff, is I'm looking for this because I want this to be, you know, just really spot on with as I'll be reading my own 5 steps. But because there's always one or two things that I think about. Oh yeah, well this is actually important too. I really got to thank the guy that wrote these and put my name on. No.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah, but no, you will always find those opportunities outside of the industry. That's where you have to look. I think we might have covered this in our last conversation, but 3D printing. I asked a group of folks this. I said, when do you all think 3D printing uh, came about? Like everybody was familiar with it in the room, and one lady
Yeah,
said 5 years ago. Another lady said, like in the early 2000s. One lady said 1970. It's kind of all over the place.
right.
Well, the one that said 1970 was probably the closest because 3D printing came about in 1984.
Yeah, yeah,
You would not have known about it unless you were in the industry. You were an architect, manufacturer. It's used for prototyping.
yeah,
But if you had seen it and you'd say, well, that's really interesting. This was being used for. You looked at its fundamental principles of what it could do. And then you asked the question, well, what else might it do? Like, how might 3D printing impact, food production? You could have asked that question. But you first have to ask the question.
right,
How might
right,
this technology here impact the way we relate to each other as family? Most people are never going to ask that question because it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, right?
yeah, yeah,
But if you're serious about trying to uncover where opportunity and disruption might be in the future, how it might unfold, those are the exact kind of questions you have to ask, right?
yeah,
We talk about artificial intelligence, we talk about big data, talk about gene editing. I mean, to ask the question, how might human genetic modification impact the future of transportation? Most people think that is a dumb question. No, it's not.
yeah.
It's actually a question that could reveal a whole lot that you've never thought about and open that door for new opportunities. At the very least, you're exploring things you've never explored before, and it
Right.
is exciting,
Well,
right?
and it gives you insights into other areas, and maybe that specific thing doesn't apply to your business or your challenge, but opening your mind up to those other possibilities perhaps starts freeing you up to think about things in a different way.
Yeah, it is. It's true. And here's the thing too, Jeff. It's also important is anytime you have a question, right? I think we did this exercise last time, but if it's AI, if it's big data, whatever it is,
Yep.
the first thing to also do is to say, how would I answer this question before I research it? So I want to jump back here because I think this is important. You have to understand that if you have an interest in a certain trend, driver, issue, whatever, you already have a baseline understanding of what it is. And you also
Hmm.
have a baseline understanding of what your industry thinks it is, either because you've taken it in through intentional reading or through osmosis, whatever it might be. So you already kind of know what the baseline answer is.
Right.
And then when you're scanning, one way to keep you on track is to say, well, I'm looking for information that either confirms, contradicts, or creates a new answer altogether. And so if you can keep it in those three realms right there, then you're like, all right, well, I'm not just answering this question and then, seeing what other questions come up, but I'm running against this criteria. Does this confirm the baseline assumption? Does it contradict the baseline assumption?
Yep.
Or have I stumbled upon something that creates an entirely new assumption altogether? And that is what really helps you to get clear on, hey, what's going on out there and what should I be looking for?
So, Jared, you know from being on the podcast that I love to wrap with the question of what should our listeners do differently tomorrow. I'm going to put a little twist on that, and I'm going to propose a call to action for our listeners based on what I've heard you say today. And you can challenge me on that, or you can say, "Oh yeah, Jeff, that was brilliant." Uh,
Those are
so,
the only
uh,
two options. No,
yeah, 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 those are the only two options. And since it was your thought, you better go with the brilliant part.
right, of course.
So, my challenge to our listeners out there tomorrow who may be stuck, not sure of which way to go, they want to change the way they're thinking, is to ask a question. Go to Google and pose a question to Google that perhaps you've been wrestling with, thinking about. And my challenge to you is to go beyond page one. Go deeper into that and see what threads you can begin to pull on. And I think that begins to open your mind to the possibilities. It helps you open your thinking to other industries different than your own, that perhaps you can bring those lessons in. So
Yeah.
how'd I do, Jared?
You did great. You did great. The one thing I would add to that is go to the search tools though, and
Yes.
limit your results to no further than 12 months because you'll
Yeah.
start getting stuff
Unless
from
you're doing a historical study instead. So
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
a great exercise. Just get that.
Yeah.
Put that challenge out there and real simply pick a driver. How
Yeah.
might this driver impact the future of this industry or whatever it is you're looking at?
Yeah.
Start from there.
And I'm going to take that challenge a step further to our listeners and say, we'd love to hear from you in the comment sections, either in LinkedIn or wherever you're grabbing this podcast from. Tell us what question you asked and where it led you. We'd love to hear that story of how you unpacked that. Jared, once again, man, I love chatting with you. I learn something each and every time we talk, and I really appreciate your time to jump on another podcast with us. My guess is we'll have you back again, should you be interested in doing that. But thank you so very much for joining us again.
Oh man, Jeff, my pleasure. I always enjoy this. Thanks for having me on.
To our listeners, please accept that challenge. And if you have a question or want to learn more, visit intervision.com. The show notes will provide links and contact information, and we'll try to link in that 5-step process that Jared referenced. This is Jeff Tunn for Jared Nichols. Thank you very much for listening.
You've been listening to the Status Go podcast. You can subscribe on iTunes or get more information at intervision.com. If you'd like to contribute to the conversation, find Intervision on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Thank you for listening. Until next time.